Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a pleasure to see you all in this audience. The idea for this forum was conceived in Senator Dick Durbin's office in Springfield on December 21st of 2018, when 4 members of Bend the Arc Jewish Action walked into his office and said, as Jewish Americans, we're afraid to be Jews in America. We feel like we have targets on our backs. And if we felt that way, we wondered how other communities who are also being targeted and threatened in certain ways by white nationalism would feel. And that's why we've brought everyone here together this evening. We're going to learn just how it feels. And while our communities try to find better ways to help and understand each other, here is something that we can all understand. The growing list of communities where tragedy has already struck. Charleston, Charlottesville, Pittsburgh, Christchurch, New Zealand, and Poway, California. When one white nationalist is incited to violence by evil rhetoric, it affects all of us. So, if you don't think that there are people who would do us harm in this community, then I'm really glad that you're here. Because we're here to tell you that it could happen right here in CU, and none of us want Champaign-urbana added to that list of memorialized cities. So we're gathered here today to learn what it's like to feel targeted by racist, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, and anti-immigrant rhetoric or violence from people who experience it firsthand. Later, we're going to talk about what we can do to start changing things for the better. I want to thank our co-sponsors. Let me see if I can take one big breath. Central Illinois Mosque and Islamic Center, CU Fair, CU Immigration Forum, CU Indivisible, CUP 61820, CU Surge, Faith in Place, the NAACP New America Welcome Center, Sinai Temple, Urbana Champaign Friends Meeting, and the UU Social Action Committee. Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank all of our co-sponsors for their support in building this powerful forum in which you all are participating. And I want to thank you in advance for limiting your questions later to domestic issues only. And before I turn this over to Tracy Parsons, who is our moderator this evening from Champaign County Community Coalition, I would like to invite Imam Usman Sawadogo, the Imam of this sacred space, to share an invocation.
Assalamu alaikum. I greet you with the greeting of peace from the Muslim community. My name is Usman Sawadogo. I am the Imam here. And on behalf of the Muslim community, I would like to welcome all of you to our mosque, to our place of worship, to your home. And before I start, I want to let you know that there are women's bathroom over there and men's bathroom there. And we have 3 exits, one here and one behind me over there, and also one there. I was asked to give an invocation, but before that, I would like to thank Ben the Arc and Diane for organizing this forum here in the mosque. This is a strong signal that united we are safe and stronger, while divided we are unsafe and vulnerable. I was in Senegal when Farouk Nelson forwarded me her email. And the email says this: "Hello, Farouk and Ben. I hope you both are well. I heard from Mercy that you have a threat recently at CIMIC. I hope that it turned out to be nothing serious. I am holding you and all my friends at CIMIC in my thoughts." Then she went on explaining that she would like to organize a forum in the mosque. So this is why we are here. The bond of dignity and peace, as well as the bond of justice, transcends race, creed, ethnicity, and every circumstance of birth. Therefore, preventing any acts that lead to a potential hate crime is the responsibility of all of us. So is working for justice for the weak and protecting those who are oppressed. The Quran says, "Help one another in furthering righteousness and God consciousness, and do not help one another in furthering evil and enmity." Now let us pray. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most beneficent, all praise belongs to God, Lord of the universe. O Lord, give us the strength to stand firm against injustice. Give us the strength to bear witness to the truth in all fairness, and never let the hatred of anyone lead us into the sin of deviating from justice. As we gathered together to hear how different minority groups in our community experience today's rising tide of hate, O Lord, inspire us to look at mankind as one single family, and to sincerely realize that empathy and compassion between the members of this human family should be just like the empathy and compassion between the different parts of one body. If any part of the body suffers, the whole body responds to it with wakefulness and fever. Gracious God, increase our love, our tolerance, and understanding of the other, of people who look different than us, who speak different language than our own. Inspire us to look at diversity as a driving force to knowing one another, not for despising one another. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes so that you might come to know one another. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of God is the most righteous of you. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تباركت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. O gracious God, you are the original source of peace. From you is all peace, and to you returns all peace. So make us live with peace, and let us enter the house of peace. Send your peace, O Lord, that we may think and act peace. Send your peace, O Lord, that we may understand one another, show solidarity to one another, and protect us from hate, fear, and division. Amen. Thank you.
And now I'll turn this over to Tracy Parsons.
Welcome, everyone. Let's try that one more time. Welcome, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here and moderate our event this evening. I'm Tracy Parsons. I'm the Community Relations Manager at the City of Champaign. I am also the facilitator of something we call the Community Coalition. It's a group made up of law enforcement, education, our community members, our park districts, our school systems, our governments. We're all just coming together to work on issues that impact us socially and economically. We meet the second Wednesday of each month from 3:30 to 5 at the Holiday Inn on South Neal. It is an open meeting to everyone, and everyone is welcome. I like to believe that I am a pretty culturally competent person as I travel around our community. This is the first time I've had a chance to come to this beautiful facility. I've driven by it no less than 5,000 times, right? And so I want to thank the Central Illinois Mosque and Islamic Center for hosting us here tonight. So can we say thank you? So I had a chance to meet Diane Orr, like everyone else, a few months ago. And again, you know, I've been doing community work, working around the topic and subject of race for about 25 years now. And often when I meet individuals like Diane, they come in and they're really passionate and excited about a subject or a topic, right? And I'm used to them coming saying, hey, this is something we should take on as a community, and want to dump it, right? And so I usually leave those first meetings and I say, okay, it's great, it was nice meeting her. I loved her passion, but Diane didn't leave it with me. She's been pushing and encouraging and letting us know as a community how important this topic and subject is to address. And so I just want to say thank you, Diane, and the entire Bend the Arc organization as well. So there are a number of wonderful organizations that are co-sponsoring. They are listed on the back of your program. I was going to ask them to raise their hands, but they're on the back of the program. Imam shared with us where the restrooms are. Thank you all for respecting the center's culture and custom around removing your shoes. I hope you have put your cell phones on silent. Now you have to use them because I'm going to tell you about something in a moment. And so we're going to try to do something a little different. We're going to try to use technology tonight and use me through technology. You know what a dinosaur I am as it relates to technology, but if you have a question or a comment, there is a text number at the bottom of the agenda page on your program. The gentleman over there, well, we have more. Thank you. Okay, so the first part is the text, and then they're going to text me the comment and the questions. I do have my glasses to pull them out and be able to read them. All right, for WhatsApp users, there is a number 2, how you use WhatsApp, and there should be a period at the end of that indication. And then we do have some old-fashioned cards going around, okay? Young lady in the back has blue cards for us that we'd be glad to take questions and comments. They're going to get those to me.
Excuse me, what about people that want to speak, that have something to share?
Well, I don't know if we're going to get to that tonight, but we'll see, and we'll do our best to accommodate those types of things. My suggestion would be to write your question or comment on a card, or send a text, or use the WhatsApp. So, all right, so we have also at 8:15, a little bit before 8:15, there is time for a Muslim prayer. So they, I believe, will go to the room, the sanctuary. And so I'm gonna hold the speakers close to their time so that at 8:10 or so, for those that are going to participate in prayer, they can go to the sanctuary. I've been told that it is okay to participate and observe if you would like to go. So that'll be about a 15-minute point, and then we'll come back and do a little bit more Q&A and closing. So, all right. So I don't know if many of you saw last night on CNN, there's a special report around the rise in hate crimes and hate groups in the United States. Now, we know that we've always had, as a society and as a nation, white supremacy groups from the beginning that have objected to the immigration of all of our groups that have come here in America over our history. The report last night talked about, though, the recent rise since the election of President Obama in the locally and nationally hate groups, white supremacist groups. They now have a new name, alt-right, that they also go by. And it's an interesting dynamic that's happening across America, because the picture that's put on terror is Islamic terrorists from across the world, right? But we know in America, those most likely to be committing acts of terror are local, national groups homegrown here in America. In fact, in 2018, there was only one national incident that was classified as an act of terrorism by an international terrorist. There were 49 incidents of domestic terrorism that are associated with white nationalists, white supremacists, and alt-right groups. Yet, Homeland Security spends about 80% of its national budget on international terrorism. This week, the FBI and Homeland Security sent out a notice to cities across America to be on high alert with the 4th of July weekend. I believe it was yesterday or the day before, James Field was sentenced to life in prison for the incident in Charlottesville with the car, and just the overall culture and climate around white nationalism, alt-right, and white supremacy activities. As Diane alluded to and talked about, we've had a number of incidents here in our community that often don't get reported, or if they are reported, they're on the back page of the news, if it even makes it to the news. So speaking with us tonight, their more extensive bios are in your program as well, but we have State Representative Carol Ammons, School Liaison for Urbana Schools, Lucia Maldonado, Ali Hussein, and then we have here from Oakland, visiting our community from the national office of Bend the Arc, Susan Lubrick. So speakers, you are on. What I will do when you get close to the end of your time, I probably will just stand. And so if you want to send your questions, we've given you the ways to do that. What we'll do is have Carol and Lucia speak, and then we'll do some of the questions, and then we'll come to this part of the group and do some more questions, okay? So thanks, everyone. Carol Ammons.
Thank you, Tracy. First and foremost, to the members of this house, assalamu alaikum, and to the imam, thank you so much for hosting this conversation. And to all of you, peace and blessings to you. And certainly I appreciate you taking a few minutes of your time to even engage in this topic. Often this is one of those topics that people want to stay as far away from as possible for the obvious reasons, right? So today we gather here in mourning, but also with a sense of hope, because A, there's so many people in this room, and B, there was so much dedication put forward to even put this event together. So I appreciate Diane and all of her dedication. You guys, I could tell you 10 minutes of what Diane was doing to get me to this event. But I won't do that. I won't do that. We're here to really speak to our own power, right? To our own power, and how we can make our houses of worship safer. This country was established on an idea of religious freedom. But that idea was not truly realized, because many, upon its establishment as we approached the 4th of July, did not have religious freedom. and did not have freedom at all. And so when we talk about white supremacy and white nationalism, I don't tend to buy the concept that it's just those people over there. I watch and see the creation of ideas and concepts and policies that lend to white supremacy and white nationalism every single day in my work. And with that, we know that white supremacy is indeed a disease. It has been a disease from the very beginning of the creation of the country, and it remains a disease to this day. And people often try to separate themselves from the concept of what generates or even creates white nationalism. White supremacy hides behind evangelicalism, selective morality, right? White supremacy is truly about power, though. It's a power dynamic that allows you to control the institutions by which your white supremacy can play out. Why don't we hear much about, and I appreciate Tracy talking about the gentleman who was just given life in prison for killing Heather at the protest. We don't hear much about that, right? It's not in our newspapers, right? We don't hear about the many instances of white nationalism that's really taking place every single day in any town, USA. We don't hear about it. We don't hear about the effects of white nationalism and white supremacy in the institutions. We don't hear about the mistreatment of inmates in our Department of Correction. We don't hear about the race riots and the wars and things that are really coming out of this white nationalist idea, all the way from the President of the United States. Unfortunately, what black people know is that the KKK just simply dissembled themselves as an outward sheet-wearing organization and transformed themselves into respectable positions in government, in civic organizations, in schools, in police forces, in every single aspect of life. And they exist in all of those places. The African American community knows very well what it looks like to experience the hatred of white nationalism. James Baldwin's book, Stranger in a Village, is quite relevant at this point. The idea of white supremacy rests, he said, simply on the fact that white men are the creators of civilization, the present civilization, which is only one that matters. All previous civilizations are simply contributors to our own, end quote, and therefore civilization's guardians and defenders. Thus, it was impossible for America and the American to accept the African American or the black man as one of themselves, and therefore wrote policies all the way into the constitutions of states that would inherently disenfranchise African American communities. But not so to accept him. They didn't accept African Americans and denied the very humanity of African Americans as a whole. His human weight and complexity, the strains of denying the overwhelmingly undeniable, forced Americans into the realization so fantastic that they approached a pathological experience. America has to deal with the issue of race. Because they don't deal with race effectively, you see the resurgence of these things every 10 years, every 20 years. Burning churches is not a new idea in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Georgia. We understand where and why these things exist. In the same week that the Notre Dame building burnt down, 3 African American churches in Louisiana were set on fire. And we didn't know about those except that there's a little thing called the internet. That's how we learned about it. It wasn't on the news. It only got picked up on the national news after it was on the internet. African American churches have been experiencing this since the inception of the nation. Over 60 churches in history have been burned. The media coverage of these churches in Louisiana was nearly non-existent until social media campaigns raised over $2 million to repair them. $1 billion was raised to repair Notre Dame. $1 billion. In 2 days, it goes without saying that the outrage of these African American parishes in Louisiana must not match the sorrow and outrage for the international icon like Notre Dame. If we are not actively fighting white supremacy, and I'll tell you how to do that, as I see how to do it, and white nationalism, we become willing participants. People who shut their eyes to reality simply invite their own destruction. What happens to African Americans today can happen to Latinos tomorrow. We can tie together the experience of the Latino community directly to the experience of the African American community since the 60s. We know exactly what the driving factors are. People who shut their eyes simply invite their own destruction, and who insist on remaining in a state of innocence long after the innocence is dead turns himself into a monster. Those are the words of James Baldwin. James Baldwin was prophetic in his writing and his messaging. He understood that America actually needed to deal with its own conscience, its own self-reality, and how it decided who was American and who was not. That is the driving factor of white supremacy and white nationalism. We are the real Americans and you are not. We must know the difference between white supremacy and white nationalism, though. Often considering one and the same is not the same. White nationalism includes one thing white supremacy may not: the need for white ethno-state. White nationalism is designed to say America belongs to us, our version of Christianity, which is absolutely part of white nationalism, religion, and it only belongs to us and you guys are visitors. The philosophy that killing off the other makes America better has not worked since the beginning of time. It's easy to dismiss these thoughts as fringe theories or the crazy statements of a president who I'm still scratching my head how he got there. He got there because some of us did not value the franchise of the vote. There are more of us than there are of them. And we allowed him to be in the White House, and we're responsible for the actions that exist as a result. It's easy for us to dismiss our ideas and say that's them, not us. But we're responsible for what happens in our community and around our community. Make no mistake, these philosophies that seem to be weird and off-center are very mainstream. When we read history correctly, you will find that these are not new concepts, but they're very much American concepts. Fox News has become the state TV for President Trump. I'm baffled often by what I see and hear on that show. Tucker Carlson, a primetime personality who spews white nationalism on a regular, talking points as he discusses the weather. It's something about white nationalism and it's sunny outside. Activists like Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens have made livings blatantly rejecting the reality and truth by simply spreading racist lies throughout their growing fan base. How do they exist? They exist because we allow them. In the last legislative session, we passed a bill that would literally aggravates the sentence of someone who murders people in a house of worship. I usually do not support bills that are enhancement bills, but this bill was so critical because we saw people literally in prayer be gunned down in America. We have to tell all of our people how to protect our houses of worship. The idea of eliminating this pattern through stricter, more policing, dropping people on, that doesn't actually work. It takes us to say something when we hear something. We need to build coalition, as Diane is doing with Bend the Arc, and everybody seated at the table to work in solidarity. This is not my first time in this mosque, and it certainly should not be your first time and shouldn't be your last. I'll close by quoting again James Baldwin. One of the things that distinguishes Americans from other people is that no other people has ever been so deeply involved in the lives of black men and vice versa. This fact, faded with all of its implications, can be seen in that history of the American Negro problem. It is not merely shameful, it is also something of an achievement. For even when the worst has been said, it must also be added that the perpetual challenge posed by this problem was always somehow perpetually met. It is precisely this black-white experience which may prove of indispensable value to us in the world as we face it today. The world is white no longer, and it never will be again. This concept of white nationalism is a fallacy, should not exist, should have never existed, and now we, in this generation, have to end it. Our communities have met historical insistence on fighting racism. I am so proud of Champaign-urbana because we come together and we face head on the problems that we experience here in this community. We have done it for the time that I have been a member of this community, and the proof truly is in the pudding. This world will never again face what many African American communities have faced because we have allies and support, and we have you, and I'm thankful for that. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Wow. You see my challenge here? So first of all, let me just say I am not a speaker. So, yes, no, I am speaking. Thank you for being here. Speaking after this powerful lady is everything that I needed. I know that I'm going to be a lot better after this just because I'm next to this powerful lady. I am an immigrant. I moved to this country more than 20 years ago. Can you hear me? I don't know if is it okay? Okay. I moved here with my two daughters. The first one was 7 and the other one was 3 years old when we moved here from Mexico. I remember the exact moment when I decided that I had to move out of Mexico. I was standing on a bus. I was really angry, and I had a knife in my back, or a gun. I never really knew what it was, but somebody was holding something in my back. I was really angry because that person was taking all the money that I made in the 2 weeks prior to that day. I was really angry because that was becoming normalized in Mexico. And I was really angry because it was the third time that that happened to me. And I was tired, I was done, and I never wanted any of my girls to go through anything like that, ever. So I decided to join their father, who was already here. Moving to US was very, very difficult. Saying goodbye to family was very difficult. But I was already living a very difficult life in Mexico. So I thought that it was gonna become easier very quickly, but it didn't. There were so many things that I actually didn't know. I was very naive. Life as an immigrant, it is incredibly hard from the beginning, and years keep passing, and you keep looking for that time that things are gonna get easier, and it doesn't come. No one really chooses to live a life the way that immigrants live a life. And I can tell you that because I went through it. Nothing was easy, but even when we were struggling in every single aspect of our lives, nothing was as scary as it was to face hate from someone else just because of who we were. It has happened many times, unfortunately, since the first day when I arrived in this country. The first time, and I remember it like it was yesterday, I was standing in line in a place in Champaign, waiting for my turn to pick up toys for my daughters for Christmas. It was our first Christmas, and we didn't have any money. One of my teachers at Urbana Adult Ed gave me a flyer, and she said that I should just go there and get some toys for my kids. It was an extremely cold day, and when I finally got my turn and I got closer to the door, the lady at the door asked for my ID. I said I don't have one, and I couldn't explain that I didn't have it with me because I didn't know I was going to need it because I couldn't speak English. And she changed her attitude with me completely. She took me inside, and I saw several tables with toys and other things, and I saw volunteers or people working there helping people and letting them choose what they wanted to take. And she didn't let me choose. She went through the tables really quickly, and she kept signing me to follow her, and she just picked two things. She looked at my paper and probably saw that I had two girls, and she picked a couple of items for me and put them in a bag. Everyone else walked out with big bags full of toys and other gifts, and I walked out with just a little bag with two items for each one of my girls. She didn't ask an ID. I didn't see her asking anybody else for an ID. She just asked me, and I was the only Latina in that line. That was the first time that I remember feeling disliked by someone just because of who I was and just because of my inability to communicate with somebody. There's been many other times, unfortunately, like the day my son and I were waiting for medicine at Walgreens. We were speaking Spanish, and the two women behind us started talking about us. One of them said something about how tired she was of hearing people speaking other languages everywhere. The least these people could do is to learn the proper language, she said. My son heard that, and I immediately noticed how uncomfortable he got. I asked him if he was okay, and he switched from Spanish to English, and he said that he was fine in a very quiet voice. I turned around and I faced the women, and I told them that my son and I are bilingual and that we speak English and Spanish well, and they should be more careful when children are present. One of them looked kind of ashamed, but the other one just kept talking to me, and she raised her voice and said, well, if you speak English, you should be speaking English outside of your house. A similar incident happened at Meyer the night before Christmas, the night before Thanksgiving one year. A woman heard me speaking Spanish on the phone, and she actually pushed me to the side in the middle of the aisle, and she said that I should speak English. I said, Happy Thanksgiving to you too, and I kept on walking. Thank you. On a different day, a man asked me if I was feeling brave wearing my hat, and he said something about Trump on a wall. I was wearing a hat with a Mexican word in it, and I love my hat, and I wear it every time that I can. And then last summer, I had a bike incident. Some of you already heard this. I rode my bike to meet a friend for coffee near my house. When I was riding back home on a beautiful evening, I was getting closer to the stop sign on my street, so I reduced the speed. A motorcycle turned very close to the corner, and he got his motorcycle closer to my bike. He was coming in opposite direction. He looked at me, and I looked at him. He smiled, and I smiled back, and he got his motorcycle very, very close to my bike. It felt like he was almost gonna touch it. And then he raised his hand, and he yelled, Trump, 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 F you, and he pointed at me on my face, and he was like this close. His eyes were filled with so much hate, and he had a very strange smile in his face, and I didn't know what to do. I looked around, and no one stopped, and no one tried to do anything, and there were enough people around us. I felt my eyes getting filled with tears. I felt my skin getting really, really cold. And I really felt completely paralyzed in fear. And I didn't notice that I didn't turn on my street because I was almost at the corner of my street. I looked back to see if he was there. He was still there, but he was gone. So I stopped my bike, and I got off my bike, and I walked home. My legs were shaking, but not shaking because of the bike ride, because of the fear. It took me a long time to calm down after I got home. The last 2 years had been very difficult for immigrants of all ages, documented and undocumented. Never before in my many years in a school district, I saw children struggling with fear related to deportation, as I saw after the election. I could never imagine somebody will consider taking his own life because of fears of immigration and deportation. But on March 29 of last year, at 5 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from a family that I know really well for many years. They were asking me for help because one of their kids took his life. He was 17 years old, and he was absolutely terrified. He was sure this president was going to take his work permit that he received through DACA, and that he was going to get deported. He's originally from a town in Mexico that has been taken over completely by drug cartels. He was terrified of that. I know many people in Champaign-urbana who are living in fear day after day. Many adults who say goodbye to their children when they leave for work, not knowing they will be able to go back to them. An encounter with immigration agents could change their lives forever. We all had seen those horrible images of children in cages at the border, families sleeping in crowded tents, waiting to be released. The economical, psychological, and emotional cost of the frequent attacks to immigrants and the fear of deportation is beyond belief. That day, when the man on the motorcycle screamed at my face his support to the president, it took me a couple of hours to get back to normal, a couple of weeks to feel safe in my own home, and a few months to actually get back on my bike. I wonder every single day how long it will take for some of these children who had been in detention camps to feel safe again. I don't blame them for being afraid. Attacks are getting to immigrants from everywhere. Months after the election, the Department of Human Services sent letters to immigrant families receiving assistance, requesting them to show proof of citizenship. Many immigrant mothers, afraid of legal consequences, canceled their assistance. Local banks sent similar letters requesting proof of citizenship or legal status. Many people closed their accounts for fear of losing their savings. The letters the Department of Social Security is sending out now, letting employers know there are discrepancies on the information of some workers, are leaving people without jobs everywhere. If you know me, you know, and I see you standing, I'm carrying up. If you know me, you know that I'm always reminding people to include immigrants in their conversation. Regardless of the topic at hand, I think we can and we should include immigrants in every conversation. We can have safe communities if we are not honestly concerned about the safety of everyone, regardless of skin tone, immigration status, language, or religion. We can have a community until we work together to ensure that everyone feels like they belong here. We can't end violence if we don't treat every victim the same, regardless of the color of their skin and or the language they speak. We expect immigrants to adapt quickly after their arrival and to overcome trauma and discrimination quickly. What if instead of expecting them to adapt, we start working harder on equality? What if instead of expecting immigrants to prove themselves, we invite them to teach us how to be more supportive? Why are we allowing this government to run concentration camps in this country? The last few weeks, I have been working with 7 children who arrived here in May after escaping extreme poverty in Guatemala. They spent weeks in immigration camps near the US border, and they live in Urbana now. They are 9, 8, 7, 5, 3, and 2 years old. 4 of them got chickenpox on the week after they got released from immigration camps. All of their bodies were covered in insect bites. 2 of them suffered from scabies, and all of them had lice. Why are we allowing this government to keep these children in cages in concentration camps? Not doing anything about it leaves the space open for people like the ones I described before to discriminate and expose their hate freely, and that is not acceptable. We, all of us, can work together to build a safe and hate-free community for all. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to take some moderator privilege. I'm going to ask Ali Hussein to come up now. I have not seen blue cards going around. Our question person is there. We've had a couple come in. So we're going to finish up. Yeah, so if you have questions, please raise them and get them picked up. Ali's going to come up, and then if we have time, we'll get Susan up before our prayer. If not, we'll start back after prayer with you, and then we'll get to your questions. I hope all of you have scheduled to be here till 9, so we have time to get everything and everyone in. And so, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Peace and blessings be upon everyone here. This is a bit of an awkward event for me because I'm a kind of antisocial science. I'm a PhD student in physics, and you can imagine how social my life is, right? So I'm used to talking to microscopes, not people. So I'll try my best. So I'd like to start Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the most merciful and the most kind. So obviously I can't give a sort of comprehensive or even concise view of how Muslims see this situation we're in right now, but at least I can give my own. So what I want to walk you through is sort of some events in my life that kind of influenced how I thought, and I guess thinking after 25 years, yeah, probably some of that was white nationalism. At the time, I guess I didn't know the name for it. So growing up in the US for my entire life, the biggest event, of course, was September 11th. After that, really, my relationship with other kids at school, I could feel some difference. So at the time, there was kids that would call me terrorist and things like that. And that really didn't bother me personally, although other people would bother, just because it was so jarring. It was so strange to hear kids call you a terrorist. It's like somebody calling you a loser at school. It's like, okay, what does that mean? How can a kid be a terrorist in the first place? It really didn't make sense to me. So that wasn't something that really bothered me. To other kids, it really did, though. I did have friends where that was something that bothered them. But as I started growing up, there were kind of more and more of these events that started to change my opinions. So when I was in middle school, I was with the imam of our small mosque. I grew up in California, Southern California. Supposedly the most accepting of different people, but in my particular case, not so much. So when I was in middle school with the imam of our small mosque, we went to the post office to, I think it was to mail something to his mother or something like that. And a police officer saw us, and he came over to talk. It was a friendly talk at first, but he really started going off on a rant about the role of Muslims in the country. And to me, that was really odd. I was only a middle schooler, so I don't really understand. Is that what police officers do when they see Muslims? They just come up to them and start ranting. But one thing I did remember, and I still remember it today, is he said, well, you know, Muslims, at the time it was the Iraq War. This was back in the mid-2000s. And he was telling us, well, Muslims, you know, you should expect to be in an internment camp because we really can't trust your allegiance to this country right now. And I had just learned about the internment camp of the Japanese during World War II, so I was like, wait, they still have that? That's still possible? Is that something that happens now? I talked to our imam afterwards, and he said, well, that's not happening. There's enough, we've learned enough from World War II that won't happen. But there was still some doubt in my mind. Wait, can that happen? But it was strange to me to really be in that situation where a police officer just approaches you, not you to him, and he tells you about these things that, why would you, we didn't do anything, we were just at the post office. And that was weird to me, but then sort of weirder events would keep happening in my life that I would start noticing. So in Southern California, if you followed the news about 15 years ago, there were a string of FBI informants that would go to different mosques. So basically the FBI would hire somebody to pretend to be a Muslim, and he would go to a mosque and kind of say, hey, here I am, I'm a new Muslim, invite me to your house, and so on. And they would go to various mosques, and so they would say, I'm a new Muslim, tell me I want to learn about the religion. And then eventually they would profile everyone that goes there, and he'd have a little huge tablet at home of, not tablet back in those days, but he would have a file. He would have files at home for who's who, and kind of rank them by, okay, who's the most volatile, who can I, and who's the most, level-headed. The most famous was in Irvine. It was really close to my house. This guy, Craig Montel. I don't know. That's his real name. The name he told everyone was Farouk. But basically, this guy, he came in. He pretended to be a Muslim, and he would come and categorize every person. He would leave these audio devices everywhere. At the time, I didn't know that. We just thought he was just a weirdo. But he would put these audio devices everywhere, and only later do we find out, wait, what is this thing? It's a little black device. This is in 2006, I think. So we didn't have smartphones and so on back then. So it's kind of weird to see a device like that. But eventually he started talking to people more and telling people, oh, you should visit this website, and they would be like this really weird website, kind of anti-U.S. government, so-called jihadist websites. And the big irony was eventually the mosque reported him to the FBI. And that's a true story. I had to look it up, but the court case is still going against them in February. But what the big point I'm trying to make here is these. Why was this even something that the government should consider to kind of profile everyone that's at a mosque? And that's really that somehow the Muslims are this other group that are kind of guests in the country. And for me, I've only grown up in the U.S. I'm ethnically from Pakistan, but when I visit Pakistan, I'm very aware that my accent is horrible. So I know I have a very American accent, so really I don't know where am I a guest at. But I had some more examples, but it'll take too long. But really, I think all these kind of events are things that would happen to, say, the Irish many decades ago, to the Jewish community, to the black community, and to the Muslims. It's just happening now, just because of how the demographics have grown over time. So it's something that we really have to tie into other communities, and other communities definitely have to teach us how do we kind of react to these things, how do we develop, and how do we make ourselves strong, because these kind of things will always happen, but we'll want to be strong enough to take them and eventually overcome them as well. And with that, I'd like to end.
So, Imam, we should maybe about 8:11, 8:12.
We still have 20 minutes.
Yes.
We have till 8:35.
The prayer's at 8:35?
8:35.
Oh, okay. I thought it was 8:15. So Susan is here from the national office, or out of Oakland. Right. Let's give her a Champaign-urbana welcome.
Wow, this is a really beautiful place to be. I'm really honored to be here. Again, my name is Susan Lubeck. I'm the National Field Director with Bend the Arc Jewish Action. We're a Jewish organization that works on economic and racial justice issues here in the U.S., and we have been doing that, working on things like fighting mass incarceration, supporting religious minorities, working on immigrant justice, working on supporting the labor movement. Those are the kinds of issues that we were working on until the 2016 election, after which time we had hordes of people coming in wanting to organize with us. So that is how Champaign-urbana formed, not just with the fabulous Diane, but with her amazing team of people. So it's really great to be here. And thank you, Representative Ammons, for quoting James Baldwin, talking about those who shut their eyes invite their own destruction. And there's a reason, though, that we shut our eyes, because the pain and the fear can be so intense that it's just easier to take another spin of Netflix, or maybe some other distraction, some other ways to fragment our attention. So it's really hard. It's hard to hear the stories. I found myself tearing up many times in the last bit of time that we've been together. And when I think about the violence and the fear, and the attacks on human beings and on democracy and on the long-term ripple effects of these, it can be quite overwhelming. So I want to invoke one of my ancestors. I really want to know whose shoulders I'm standing on. And one of those people is my grandfather. His name was Heschel Lindenbaum. He came to this country in 1922, very soon before this country passed a very harsh immigration law to try to keep out people, again, more strands of white supremacy. And so he was legal when he came in 1922. Had he not come then, he could well have been wiped out in the Shoah and the Holocaust, and I might not be standing here right now. And his, what he went through and his resilience, he was very involved in his labor union. He was a garment worker. I would just want to acknowledge him and draw on his strength and his power and say that by doing that and also by being together is the way that we cannot shut our eyes. It is the way that we can both confront the current crisis, which is really quite extreme. But not only can we confront the current crisis, but I really believe that if we reach for each other, if we keep listening to each other's stories, if we stay together even when we get pissed off and annoyed, which will happen regularly, if we take public action together and refuse to be divided, not only can we beat back the current crisis, but I actually believe we can transform this country to live up to the values that it holds up and to achieve an actual multiracial democracy with equity for all. That's the vision that I want us to hold while we really fight for our lives, because that's what's happening right now. Thank you also for talking about white supremacy and white nationalism. I want to just go into that a little bit more, and I also want to share a little bit about anti-Semitism. So, as I was growing up, I also believed that these extreme white supremacists were a kind of small fringe group. I remember when David Duke was running for office decades ago, and it was kind of an aberration. And so of course, those worldviews have continued to exist. They were the basis of many aspects of the structures of how this country was created. And in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement, which was a brilliant and beautiful movement led by Black Americans, white supremacists found themselves at a loss because of their ideology of inferiority. They were kind of gobsmacked about how this could have happened. And they, in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement, that's when the white nationalist movement started forming as a movement, not just in ideas of white supremacy, but, and let me just backtrack a second and just say that unfortunately, and as I'm sure many of you know, we're all operating in a context of white supremacy. So even those of us, like myself, I do not want to espouse racist beliefs or practices, and yet, as a white person, I benefit from white supremacy, and I want to fight against that. Well, then, of course, we know there are people who are overt white supremacists. That is their belief system, and they want to maintain what they consider to be white superiority and white access to economic gains, powers, and privileges. White nationalists go beyond white supremacists. They are an organized social movement that have a particular agenda, as we heard earlier, of a white ethno-state. Their agenda is implicitly violent because the only way that their plan can be achieved is through expulsion or murder. Okay, that's just, I really hate to have to be saying these words to you tonight, but that is what we're facing. And unfortunately, because of demographic changes where people of color are going to be a majority in this country, because of economic exploitation and many, many people feeling like they can't make it in America and the social contract is broken down and they're scared and they're freaked out, because of the internet and the easy ability for radicalization and misinformation to spread, because of all those things, and because they now have access to some of the highest offices in the land, they are very effectively organizing. So for example, just in 1 year, the number of white nationalist groups went up by 50% from 2017 to 2018. There were, in the 2018 elections, depending on how you count them, there were somewhere between 9 and 17 overt white nationalists running for elected office. And it is not inconceivable that they actually could win. So what was considered fringe and kind of weird and like kept at the margins is trying to move itself into the mainstream. And so when we say hate has no place here, which of course that's a great shorthand, but we have to understand that hate isn't some weird thing floating around that people are catching kind of individually. It's a product of a social movement that wants to eliminate pretty much everybody here from this country. And so it's I know I'm really sad to be the bearer of bad tidings, but we got to hold on to that larger vision, because the truth is that if we actually take public action and we stick together, we actually really can win and not just beat this back, but we can get someplace different. Let me say just a couple minutes about anti-Semitism. So, as a white Jewish person, I'm super aware that the people who are the most immediately targeted by the politics that we have right now and by white supremacy and white nationalism are not white Jewish people. I get that. And there's, it's very, part of us being together is understanding some of these differences. So I've just learned this myself in the last couple years. It's not like Jews are just one of the people that white nationalists hate, although we are. In their twisted worldview, anti-Semitism is core to their ideology. This goes back to, I think, Ali, you were talking about this idea of sort of being seen as other or untrustworthy. So that's one of the stereotypes about Jewish people that goes back, way, way back, thousands of years, is that, oh, they might look good, but they're irredeemably hostile, they're gonna undermine. So anti-Semitism is a worldview that says that Jewish people who are actually diverse religiously, we're diverse racially, we're diverse politically, but instead of treating us as a varied group of people, it treats us as a thing, the Jews. And some of the messages about Jewish people that you may have just heard and treated as just normal fact is that Jewish people are sneaky, we control everything, we're the puppet masters, so we have all the money. So any time that you hear people saying, oh, those protesters at the Kavanaugh hearings, those were paid protesters, that's a dog whistle saying that George Soros is the other dog whistle, that Jewish people are the ones who are creating these movements, which is absurd. Oh, Jewish people must be the ones who, for example, the man who killed 11 people in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue, he heard all these misinformation and hateful, dehumanizing information about how the migrant caravan was going to invade America. Remember that? So part of what was going out in right-wing social media was that George Soros was paying to have immigrants basically take over America and endanger the white Christian future of America. So that is why he thought, okay, well, here's the synagogue. They're part of this Jewish refugee aid organization called HIAS. I need to go in there and I need to kill those Jews because they are causing immigrants to come and invade and destroy America. So when you hear those kinds of messages, don't treat, know what you're hearing and know that we as Jewish people, we're totally here, we're totally in this fight to fight against white supremacy and against white nationalism. And that we want you to hear our understand us and hear our story as part of the we. So we can do this. Together, we're going to not shut our eyes. We're going to not allow our democracy to be taken from us, because one of the things that's happening is by playing on the fears of white Christians, they're getting people so scared of invading migrants, Jews, Muslims, etc., that people are willing to give up democracy in search of some mythic idea of white Christian safety, which doesn't exist. So together, we're going to fight back, and we are going to create the democracy that we all need. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to switch it up on you. We have questions. We have comments. So a number of you have specific questions that have been asked of you. So when I call, will you stand, and then we'll go to the mic, and then we'll ask you your question. So a couple of things. One is that this is just a general comment as it relates to this discussion, that we are talking about this from a religious space. There's been a comment that the LGBTQ, yes, community, yes, the entire LGBTQ population needs to be included in the amount of hate that's taking place in our community. So we don't want to forget that as we talk about this subject. On July 22nd, CU Public Health is having a training from 10 to 2 to help identify people who are on the extremist end of their beliefs and actions. And so from 10 to 2 on July 22nd, there's a training to help professionals and community members learn how to help identify this population of folks. So I'll start off with you, Ali, if you don't mind, if you go to the mic. When did you realize that the incidents happening to you were actually Islamophobia?
I guess I didn't realize it until maybe the word Islamophobia came out, because say, I think like 7-10 years ago, I don't think the word existed, or if it did, I'd never heard of it. So I probably only realized it once that became a word. Before that, it's just, oh, you don't like Muslims, I guess. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes. All right. So, Carol, if you would go to the mic, please. So they would like to know if, since President Trump has been elected, has that helped in desensitizing us as a community, as a nation, as it relates to white supremacy and its resurgence?
I actually think since his election, it has awakened us and actually brought us to a level of awareness that perhaps we were closing our eyes before. I kind of wrote a couple notes down on this. Susan was speaking, and it just reminded me that we had so many instances that were already in the historical record, right, that we weren't paying attention to and we weren't responding to. Strom Thurmond was elected. He was an open white supremacist, but he was elected. We also had COINTELPRO that happened in the 60s and 70s against African Americans for a very long time. And so often, unfortunately, our educational system kind of left out so much of this information that we just assumed these things weren't happening until President Trump became elected. But that is not true. And I don't think it's even in our best interest to center this conversation as if because he's there, all of a sudden, right, nationalists exist. That's so not true. And I think we need to be real and be realistic about the totality of the historical record so that we can face it truthfully and come up with resolutions and answers to collectively.
So stay up, please. I actually got a call about this myself today from the community of Freeport. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the incident at the hospital where an African-American man was arrested. He was a patient. He was outside of the hospital walking. He actually had his IV and his carrier, and he was in his hospital gown and was out for a walk as he had been instructed by his doctor to do, and he ended up getting arrested because hospital security thought he was stealing from. So, you know, the other part of the question really is around, we've had a lot of diversity and inclusion training in business and in the corporate world. Is that enough? Is that more that needs to be done? So I don't know if you know the specific incident to speak to that, but maybe you can talk about diversity and inclusion in business and in corporate.
You know, unfortunately, I didn't hear that story, but it's become so commonplace, certainly in the African-American community, the slaying of innocent, unarmed African-American men largely, but certainly African-American women have been experiencing that for a very long time. We heard last week of a family who was stopped because a 4-year-old may have stole a doll from a store and was totally terrorized and harassed because of that 4-year-old's innocent action. I mean, there are so many that I can name that we would be here all night. I don't believe that the issue is necessarily that we are lacking diversity. I do believe that we have a problem with actually hiring people that are conscious and conscientious in our governmental spaces, right? And so people, every time there's an incident, they say, we just ain't got enough training. Well, I don't ascribe to that view. I believe wholeheartedly that we have plenty of training, but we've not decided that we would put people through a real rigorous coursework so that they can start identifying their own biases and start eliminating them. As long as we have people who are willing, you know, I went to Muhammad, I'm sorry, Tracy. I went to Muhammad recently. My staff and I visited the museum there, and it was a really wonderful experience. As we were walking through, I looked at the migration track of this area and African Americans traveling from the South. And I was really surprised to see the number of African Americans that settled in Homer, Illinois. I know you're surprised too. Why are you surprised? Because something happened. Something happened in Tolono. There were African Americans there, right? There were African Americans in East Urbana long before that point. So we have to look at what structure has happened in our society that allowed us to otherize all of these other people and accept it as a normal practice of life. That's really what the problem is that I believe in the corporate world. Why do we have to pass a bill in Springfield to mandatorily require corporate boards that receive public dollars to have an African American and a Latina on the board? We have to pass a law for that. That is utterly ridiculous, and I believe that is where we have given our dollars to corporate entities, and we've not asked them to be conscientious and responsible back to the American citizens.
Lucia? So there's, as you come to the mic, Lucia, there is a person that shared that they wrote a letter to the editor about the bike issue, and it wasn't printed.
Thank you.
Can you just really touch on two things real quickly? So one is the employment of immigrants in our community or Latinas in our community, how they're treated in the business community. Share and talk a little bit about that. And then if you could just talk a little bit more about the children being separated as they come into our country.
Can we stay here until tomorrow?
No. Quickly and to the point.
Work. I don't think it's been as difficult as it is now because of the letters that are going out to from the Social Security office. I can tell you that a lot of people have lost their jobs in the last month. A lot of people. A lot of people didn't lose their jobs, but they were asked to bring different information because their employers usually know who they hired. A lot others got a reduction on their paycheck just because their boss knew who they were working with. So there's been a lot of things, and some of those are really, actually, really bad. I know that some of the big companies that work in roofing construction, this is their busiest season, so they didn't want to lose any workers, and some of them had been motivating and forcing their workers to become independent contractors, except they are not providing the right information. So some of these workers now are independent contractors, having no idea what they're going to be doing when time comes that they have to do taxes and so forth. So I know that a lot of people are going to be upset at the end of the year. Second question was?
Family separation at the border.
I don't know exactly what I can say about that. It is just horrible. What's happening at the border, and the families that are being separated are usually families that are not, adults that are not traveling with their own children. So if the families here, the parents here are bringing their children from their home countries and they're having somebody else bringing them, those children are the ones that are being separated. However, most of the other families that are actually traveling in units, and it's usually a male and one child, they are allowed to stay together, but the conditions are horrible. When you talk to these kids and they don't know, so they tell you exactly what happened and how it happened, and it is really horrible. But I have a lot to say about that, but you don't want to know. Honestly, you don't want to know details. It is horrible.
So will one of you come in and take the mic to her, please, so she can, yes. Oh, yeah. You have 1 minute, yes.
My name is Patsy, Sister Patsy. I've been a Muslim for 30 years, but I've been an activist and fighting white supremacy and racism for 50 years. Okay? So I think that it's really important to bring the discussion. It's really important what's happening here. It's really important to talk about what's happening in our community. And I'm glad to see this happen. I don't want to take away from it. But people should also understand Hitler got his plan for fascist, what he did from the U.S. Now, this is documented on the computer. It started to become knowledge. Okay, my daughter and I did a radio show, and when I first came across that. So we're talking about the rise of fascism. You know, we're talking about, you know, hate. Love may just not be able to talk to this thing. You know, it's true, I'm an organizer, and I've been in cadre organizations that focus on fighting white supremacy. However, it's always been here. Because the other thing we have to understand is colonialism. Colonialism has always been based on white nations going into Africa. So I think that we need to understand these terms. If you want to know what's happening today, it's extremely important to understand colonialism, white skin privilege. I was under one line, the white blind spot, because white people do have a blind spot when it comes to looking at this. Okay? And that Trump is not just keeping his ugliness and hate here in the U.S. You know, he's meeting with Israel for the genocide of Palestinians. He's meeting with Saudi Arabia, where everything's, you know, killing people, getting rid of people, putting taxes on immigrants there. So he's on the move. Egypt, you know, we're seeing this all over the world. But here, in the movement, we like I said, we're in the belly of the beast. And so we are in the belly of the beast. And their foot soldiers are the white supremacists. But this is an ideology. It's a system that is rotten to the core. And this is not going to stop until people just rise up and say, we don't want to be a part of this.
And that's what we're doing today. Thank you so much. Yes. Okay, so Carol, if you want to talk about, you talked about voting. but do you have one or two other suggestions outside of voting that we might think about as a community? Okay.
It's in her closing.
Okay, we'll let her say her thoughts, and then if you would, because it's one of your questions for you.
Well, I do think that Sister Patsy is correct that we have to join organizations like this. We have to join in coalition. We have to work on an everyday basis around this concept of pushing people out. That's a very important part. I would never suggest that activism doesn't change things. That's why I'm here. All right? Activism changes things. And we have to be willing to step out of our comfort zones. It does cost you something. It does. It costs you not just your time. It may cost you your money. It could cost you your job. It could. It is unpopular to raise issues that no one wants to watch or see. But fascism has been exported all around the world from the very beginning of time. It is very true that America is working collectively on the international stage to spread this ideology that Trump represents. Just think about this. On July 4th in Washington, D.C., we are going to see tanks in the Capitol. That should be horrifying to every single American that you are copying North Korea. You're copying North Korea's process of control. And so it is indeed necessary for us to spread the message in our own circles, spread the message in your own church, spread the message in your mosque, spread the message in your civic organizations, and absolutely spread the message to your elected officials. Don't elect a single person who is unwilling to deal with the issues of mass incarceration, that is unwilling to deal with the issues of significant policy changes that infringes upon the other communities, that would make it, and we literally had a bill that would make it illegal for people to enter the country if they're Muslim. We have to literally fight civically, politically. We have to fight the educational system that refuses to educate our children so that they are not suckling on white supremacy every single day. There's no way a child should be approached in that manner. And so it does require us to come out of our comfort zones, to run for that elected position, because we need people that will make decisions that are inclusive and multicultural, and they won't do it if you're not there.
So Susan, if you would go up, please, and we just have, you'll be the last question. Yes, so we're going to take the a break for prayer, and then that'll be 12, 15 minutes? 10 minutes. And so those that are interested, it is okay to go and participate or even observe. And the rest of us, we will be here until they come back, and then we will do our closing. So Susan.
Yes.
Tell us about something you've picked up today that you can take back to your national office about our work here in Champaign-urbana.
Yeah, well, this whole event, one thing that I'm picking up here is just a tremendous amount of energy. And I want to use that to say, don't miss out on the close, because Diane and the planning team, they have some ideas for action that they want to gauge your interest in. So please come back for the close. But I will say also that something else that I'm taking from tonight is just the very idea of this event as a template for communities that we have all around the country. We've got chapters all around the country, and I'm going to be sharing what you all have done here tonight and suggesting that other folks consider doing this as part of a sustained campaign of doing political education and building relationships as a groundwork for us to take action together.
Okay, so the sanctuary is back here. We do have refreshments over here. So while everyone's taking their seats, can we just have a wonderful round of applause for a great evening? So I wanted to make sure that, that we know that there are a number of members that are here as part of Bend the Arc, outside of Diane and Susan. So let's give a round for the entire Bend the Arc group. We want to make sure we thank the Central Illinois Mosque and Islamic Center once again for hosting us. What a really powerful statement to make as a community, to have our Jewish community and our Islamic community, Muslim community here together in this space to start our community conversation. So I just want to do one more round of applause for that, please. So just a couple closing comments, because I know there's a lot of great conversation taking place throughout the break and the prayer, but a couple of things I just wanted to share to think about, and then I'm going to turn it over to Diane. So one of the things that I heard from a couple of you is we continue to categorize each other and put each other in boxes, right? And how do we break out of that, right? How do we respect and appreciate our cultural differences, our religious, spiritual, ethnic, all of our differences, respect and appreciate that, right? And so, but not put us in a box and categorize us around that. You know, I talk at our coalition meetings a lot about the most segregated time in America is Sunday between 9 and 1, right? So how do we get our faith communities to continue talking and working together and addressing these issues is something that just came out really, really clear. And then through the coalition, the other thing that we've been doing a lot of work around this notion of trauma. And we all are severely traumatized by these actions and this activity. So I just want us thinking about that. When you are a trauma-informed community, it says, instead of saying what's wrong with you, it says what has happened to you. And we all are significantly traumatized by these events and the actions of a small few. So thank you for allowing me to be the moderator tonight. It's been a pleasure. And I'm going to turn it over to Diane to close us out. And there we go.
Hello. It's on. Okay, so first of all, I have to say to you that we're not going to let this momentum die. There is more energy in this room tonight from so many different people that I can feel it. I have goosebumps just thinking about it. And we have to move forward with it. This is a defining moment in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. And I don't know exactly what makes Champaign-Urbana so special, but it is. And everyone who lives here feels that way. And so let us take this togetherness that we feel just because we get to live in this special place, and let's not waste it. Let's use it for good, let's use it for positive, let's use it for power, and let's move this country where it needs to be. So, to that end, we have been thinking about the hows. How can we do this? And we have come up with some ideas, and we need to gauge interest here tonight to see what you all think about our plans. So there are 3 things that we can do very easily, we feel, and pretty quickly. The first thing is that we want to know how many of you are interested in participating in witness and safety teams. Do you want to hear more about that? The short story on that is if a young black man is being harassed by a group of white young men on a basketball court, do you want to be part of a team that comes and provides support in the moment for that youth. And we can make that happen. We just have to come together and we have to write the story. Do you want to hear more about our No Hate Radio plan? Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity are on WDWS 36 hours a week. And many of us from Bend the Arc volunteered to listen. We had to take hour shifts because we couldn't listen to more than that. But we took our shifts. I know, we took our shifts and we listened to this conspiracy theory stuff because we needed to know how it was getting paid for to be on the air. And we found out that there are so many local advertisers. I mean, there are just, you know, one after another after another. And I believe that these people don't even know that their money is being spent. Okay, well, maybe. But all right, so I have one person who wants to work on this, right? Okay, so anyway, you get the gist. And what we want to know from you is, are you interested in talking about this? The third thing is, do you want to learn more about white nationalism and how to thwart it? Because on August 15th, we have coming to Champaign the author of a toolkit entitled, I don't remember what, but talking about how to recognize when our students, as young as middle school, as young as 11, are being indoctrinated into the white supremacy camps. Okay? 11. And they are mesmerized by the graphics and the games. And it's not a game. So Nora Flanagan is going to be coming here, presenting a workshop, and her toolkit has been adopted by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it has been distributed in every state in the union. And we will hear from her directly how to stop this indoctrination. Okay, the overall overall goal, I guess I should have started with, is to build a new coalition. Build a new coalition of African American people, Jewish people, Muslim people, and Latinx people, to have a steering committee with all of those people represented who can tell each other again our stories and have us better understand how our other neighbor feels. How our neighbor, not our other, how our neighbor feels. Tonight we were introduced to some of that, and I personally am going to make a greater effort to start right here, right now, and own some of the concepts that have been floating around tonight and say, I want to do better. I know I haven't done so much in the past, but right now, right here, I want to do better. So I would like for all of you who are interested to either text to the number in your program, yes. I would like to first see a show of hands. How many of you would be interested in hearing more about any of these three concepts? Woo! Yay! Yay you! Yay you! Okay? And then text on that number or write on the piece of paper that's going around or get a note card and come bring it up to the table which one you think you might be interested in, or just say, I'm interested, and that's fine. But if you can give us a way to contact you, we will do that. And I'm not a whistling Dixie. I make things happen. You heard that. I make them happen. So we are going to move quickly. As you see, August 15th is like tomorrow, and we already have another forum to plan. Okay? So let us know your interest. Sign up at the Bend the Arc table on the way out if you haven't yet. We are so excited that you're here tonight, and we are so excited to work with you moving forward. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming.